Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third Adath Women's Discussion Group. My name is Ellen Delovich, and along with Nicola Levy and Barbara Wenger, your co-chairpersons for this evening, we are so very happy to have all of you join us for this Adath Sisterhood evening. We are thrilled to have Martine Cohen as our speaker, facilitator for this event. Martine attended Jewish school in Montreal, and after high school, she attended seminary for 2 years, where she received a joint teaching diploma from Beit Yaakov Seminary in Montreal and Machon Gold in Jerusalem. She later studied at McGill University, where she obtained 2 law degrees. She is a corporate lawyer by profession and has a license to practice law, both in Quebec and in Israel. She enjoys learning Torah and gives women's classes in Torah and spirituality. In 2019, she was a chaperone on the March of the Living trip, and that summer led a women's trip to Israel. Maybe we'll be doing another one in the future. She's past president of the board of Hebrew Foundation School in Dollard des Ormeaux, and currently sits on the board of Hebrew Academy, as well as on the board of the Association of Jewish Day Schools. In addition to her career in law, Martine also has training in energy healing and is a certified life strategies coach. After healing her own concussion, Martine felt the need to pay it forward. She launched her new business, No More Layers, where she teaches, speaks, gives workshops, and helps individuals and professionals in the areas of communication, empowerment, and life strategies. When she is not helping others, she enjoys spending time with her family, volunteering, exercising, doing yoga, meditating, and baking. So, as I said, we are very honored to have Martine lead this group. Tonight's topic, would you convert if you weren't born Jewish, is both unusual and thought-provoking. We knew Martine was the right person to address this topic and present something from a new viewpoint that would ignite some discussion. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat and Nicola will present them to Martine so she can answer them. Don't hesitate to question or challenge anything you might hear tonight, as all opinions are welcome. We look forward to a thought-provoking presentation. It's my pleasure to now hand it over to you, Martine Cohen.
Thank you so much. So thank you everyone for joining here tonight. I'm really excited to talk about this topic with all of you. When I was preparing for it and giving it some thought, it was something that when I was younger, interestingly enough, I had thought about as I was getting to know kids that were not Jewish and they had Christmas or they had other holidays, and I'd be like, okay, thank God I'm Jewish, because otherwise I would have just had to convert. And that was my mindset. And it's interesting, I'll discuss it a bit later as we go along in this talk, but I felt it would be a really long and arduous road. And just, it was kind of like instinctive. I didn't really know anything about conversion or anything like that had I not been born Jewish. That was just me when I was a little kid and I was going to Jewish day school and I was learning all about it, and it really resonated. But I love the fact that we're talking about this now, because this weekend is Shavuot. And for those of you, some of you may know and some of you may not, but Shavuot is the holiday where the Hebrews were freed from slavery. They were in the desert for a certain amount of time, and then they reached Mount Sinai and they received the 10 Commandments and the Torah, and they actually make an agreement and a covenant with God, and they officially become the Jewish people, the people of God. So it's very apropos to have this type of talk, on the eve of that holiday. That holiday is also where we read Megillat Ruth, and Ruth was the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, the King David, the king, we have the Magen David is the Star of David, and so he was a very big personality for the Jewish people and a very inspiring king, and he was born from a great-grandmother that herself converted. Ruth was a convert. She was a Moabite, and then she converted to Judaism. he comes from then, and his yard site is actually on Shavuot. So he actually passed away on Shavuot. So everything is kind of interrelated and linked in a certain interesting way. That's just a bit of background to sort of put you in that frame of mind of maybe some of the discussion that we have today will sort of shed some light and have you have a more maybe meaningful and thoughtful Shavuot as well as we go through that kind of journey together here this evening. I was thinking about how to present this tonight, and I was saying, well, in order to properly answer this type of question, we have to consider a number of things. One of them is, well, if I wasn't born Jewish, would I convert? Is what actually is Judaism? The other thing that I was thinking about is what is the Torah's perspective on being Jewish versus not being Jewish, versus being a non-Jew? And God created the world for all of humanity. Then how did we come about to being Jewish? Why is there such a concept to begin with? Then I wanted to go into the process of conversion and why is it arduous and then why is it long? And then why would a person choose to convert? What motivates somebody to do that if they're not born Jewish? And then as a conclusion, just some food for thought that I would love you to bring with you and having some sort of discussion. So if that sounds okay to everybody, I think we can begin. So when we think about Judaism, some of us might think about the Torah, some of us might think about holidays as a family. We might think about a bunch of, I don't know, rules and regulations or hardships or meaningfulness. I guess it depends on our own personal experience with Judaism, if I can say it that way. So Judaism, the inception of Judaism is actually with Abraham, where he is the first Hebrew. He's called an Ivri, which means a person on the other side. Ever is another side. So Abraham recognizes that there is one God. He kind of has this intuitive knowing. He understands, so he creates monotheism. He brings that into the world as there is one God, and this God is abstract. It's not an idol. It's not a statue. It's not, a planet or a star or something, and there are no gods. But there is one. And so that's he's the forefather of the Jewish people because he brings that thought and that new concept to the forefront, and then he goes and teaches the masses about it. But when we think about Judaism, and I'd like maybe some people to just tell me what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear Judaism? Just anybody, just a word or two. Doesn't have to be a whole, just a word.
Spirituality.
Okay.
Torah.
I think it's automatically
Torah.
my people. It's my people.
Okay, sense of belonging. Okay.
Yeah.
Family.
Family. Okay, good. So there's spirituality, which means it's a dimension outside of this 3D world, right? It's something that we don't see. Spirituality is something that you sense, but not with your five senses, right? It goes beyond that. It's not emotional, it's not physical, it's not auditory, it's not kinesthetic, it's something else. A sense of belonging, if you say community or family, which means there's something bigger than myself that I can belong to, that can be connected to basically inherently. Because whether it's community or family, I don't earn it. I don't have to work for it. It just comes, I come in it, or it comes along with me. I'm just part of something. So Judaism is abstract. It's something that while we practice it and it has expression through our five senses, we can do things, we can speak spirituality, we can speak Torah, we can learn Torah, we can process it mentally. It can mean something to us, so we can be emotionally connected. Kinesthetically, we do a lot of commandments. We can light candles, men could put on tefillin, so there is that kinesthetic approach as well. It's like it teaches us and uses all our five senses. So it's really sort of all encompassing and it's very immersive. It's also a way of life. It's a religion, it's an identity, it's a culture, it's a sense of belonging, and it's really an agreement and a covenant between God and us, each of us individually, but really collectively. So it's a relationship. It's a relationship that once you're in it, you're kind of in it, right? There's no divorce, there's no saying, okay, I'm not talking to you anymore. We don't get severed. It's there for life. It's inherent, and we can transmit it from generation to generation. So that's kind of the specialness of Judaism. Some people look at it and see the Torah as a bunch of laws and rules and regulations and obligations. There are obligations in the Torah, the rules and the regulations are there mostly as a guide, as a manual. The same way as for a fridge, for example, we welcome, the manufacturer's manual, because otherwise we'd have to break our heads to figure it out. Well, we don't know how our body functions. And the Torah comes and says, if you want to balance, if you want to be balanced emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, you follow this guidelines, you do this, you don't have to worry about it. You can go about and do what you're really meant to do here on earth. You can go and figure out your purpose and do your calling, not have to worry, because the things that the Torah discusses are things that we would do anyways. It just shows us the way in which to do them. So that's part of Judaism as well. And Judaism is also a responsibility. It's a privilege and it's a responsibility. Can anyone tell me what they think that might mean? Where's the responsibility aspect and where's the privilege aspect? Any thoughts? They're all good.
Well, I think we're told that we're responsible, like we're responsible for each other.
Okay.
Yeah, we hear that often. We're taught often. Yeah.
And,
Right.
and we're responsible.
And some people also now it's the whole movement of Tikkun Olam, that kind of responsibility has, but I think that's new. I don't know if that's really original or not, but it's something that I've heard lately. Yeah.
Great. So we are responsible for each other because, like some of us said before, we're a family and there's a sense of community. So that's inherent at the core of Judaism. It's one for all and all for one, but it's not where each person is a desert island, like, for example, in a monastery where, you go out on your own and you meditate for 40 years, or a monk somewhere or whatnot. That is not what Judaism is about. It's about community. It's about working together. And in fact, when the Hebrews come out of Egypt and become Jews, they do it as a group. They don't do it individually. It's really sort of a whole group thing. And then we move forward with that. So yes, everybody is responsible for each other. So that's a sense of responsibility, but that could also be seen as a privilege, right? Because that means that everybody has your back and you can be part of something that's bigger than yourself and a community. Tikkun Olam is part of being a light unto the nations. So the purpose of the Jew is to bring godliness onto earth. It's to merge spirituality with materiality. So it's not about being poor and not having material things, but it's about elevating everything material to a spiritual level. So for example, when you have a beautiful meal or even not a beautiful meal and you say a prayer before it, like non-Jews say grace and we say certain blessings on certain foods, it's actually to infuse that food so that it elevates the energy of the apple or the orange or the meat or whatever that you're eating, merging it with some sense of spirituality. And then when you eat it, it nourishes you both physically and spiritually. So there's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of spirituality that, like Marcy said, to Judaism that sometimes gets lost because we're in a very busy, fast-paced world, and sometimes we don't have the mind space for it, or we don't have the time, and we have distractions, and we have the rest of the material world that is a real pull for us today. That wasn't so thousands of years ago. And so balancing that out is part of Judaism, how to balance it out, how to be in this world, but at the same time, bring in the godliness into the world. And so that's the responsibility. The privilege of that is the ability that we have, the innate ability to do it, and what it feels like when you do. So what it feels like when you do something that's spiritual, maybe you're lighting Shabbat candles, but you're really into it. And so you're doing something physical, but you're infusing it with the spiritual meaning behind it. Maybe you're thinking of the light of God, or maybe when you're lighting a yortzeit candle and you're thinking of the beautiful soul of the person that you are, sort of honoring in that moment and connecting with. Whatever it is, that's when you merge the two. And when you merge the two, it's almost like a euphoric feeling. It's a feeling of, everything makes sense. There's a sense of connection that is unlike any other sense. That's when we're able to sort of put all our distractions aside and really delve into Judaism. So Judaism it adds meaning to our life. It's an inherent relationship with God. If you're Jewish, it comes as part of your package. It's almost in your DNA. You have that sort of like direct line to God. And we all feel it in some ways or other. Some people feel it through, heavily practicing Judaism. Some people feel it through feeling it. Some people, will come to it every once in a while, but when they need something that's bigger than themselves, they will pray to God. Or when there's a wedding, they will do it the Jewish way. Or when there's a funeral, nobody's going to think of doing it in a non-Jewish way or sitting Shiva, because we know that when something is big, we turn to our root, we turn to our core, and our core is Judaism. So Judaism is about all of that. It's about tikkun olam and being a light unto the nations. God tells us that our job as Jews is to bring his godliness onto earth and to be a light unto all the other nations. And today, in more modern terms, we've called that tikkun olam, which means sort of fixing the world or remedying it or making it whole again. And unfortunately, we know that today there are a lot of things that need to be made whole. And part of the reason why some nations dislike Jews is because Jews stand for truth. They stand for integrity. They stand for godliness. So when I went on March of Living in 2019 and I was a chaperone, one of the things that struck me the most about the Nazis is not their hatred for Jews as people, but their hatred for Jews as what the Jews stood for. It stood for good. Because at the end of the day, when you saw the way in which they created this like death machine and they went back in time, and if you were a quarter Jewish from your grandparents or great-grandparents, whatever it was, they wanted to eradicate what the Jew represented, which means the morality of the world, the consciousness of the world, the conscience of the world, and God. And they didn't want that. They wanted to have a free-for-all. So we represent that, and nations who are not on the right path have an issue with us for that reason. So that's where the responsibility comes in. Can we manage to be part of this world, sometimes get slack for it, but still represent and be strong in who we are, and do that tikkun olam and be that light unto the nations, no matter what, adversity or what, we encounter on that path. And that's what a Jew means. So that's both a responsibility, and the privilege is that inherent connection and sense of meaning that we have that non-Jews don't. There's an extra dimension to our soul because it's directly connected to God, and we don't have to do anything for that. So that's what it means to be Jewish. So before we decide if we convert, we would have to understand a little bit what we're converting into. From the Torah's perspective, though, it's very interesting because we consider the Torah to be the Torah of the Jews, but Christians have the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they have it correctly. The Torah belongs to everybody. The Torah is the story of the creation of the world. It explains that there is one God. It goes into the fact that there is a chosen people out of all the people and all the nations, and that is the Jews. The Jews get the land of Israel, but the non-Jews have a place. And we see that in a number of different things. We see that in the way that the Torah discusses converts, right? It says when you have a stranger amongst you, and there's a whole process, and there are ways in which to deal with the stranger amongst you, which is also the person who is in the process of converting. The Torah also talks about Noah. So before Jews came to be, and after there was a flood, right? There was Adam and 10 and then there were a number of generations, and the humanity being what it is started to sin and made it that the world was so chaotic that God felt that there was no other way but to have a huge flood for 40 days. And Noah and his family are the only people that are chosen to survive it. So really after Adam and Eve, then it's Noah that is really sort of the father of all humanity the second time around. And it's interesting because he is not considered to be the first Jew, but he is the father of all the other humans that come afterwards. And he is not given the Torah, but he is given what's called the 7 mitzvot of the sons of Noah. In other words, as a non-Jew, if you want to be a good non-Jew, a good human, according to the Torah, you have 7 mitzvot, not 613 like we do, but you have 7 that you have to follow. And if you follow those, then you are being a good human, a good non-Jew, according to the Torah and according to God. So it's very interestingly that there is a place for non-Jews and for non-Jews to remain non-Jews, and then there's a place for Jews. And the Torah encompasses all of them. So the 7 mitzvot of the 7 commandments for a non-Jew would be to recognize God as the only God, not to do any idol worshiping, not to do anything that's against God or blasphemy of God or cursing God or denying God, right? Those are the first 2. So no idolatry. It's monotheistic. There are no statues, no Jesus, none of that kind of stuff. You can't, there's no murder. there is no theft, there are no illicit relations. So there's a question of morality. And then you cannot, and this was added later, you cannot eat the limb of a living creature. So there's a question of not just kindness to animal, but not doing any evil, not damaging or hurting the spirit of an animal while it's still alive. So you have to, the animal has to be dead for you to be able to eat it. And then having a justice system in place, which is really interesting because some of these seem to be a relationship between man and God. Another part is a relationship between man and even living creatures, living beings. Then there's a relationship between man, and carrying out justice would be part of that. So have good governance. So really, while there are only 7 of them, they're all encompassing. So you do not have to be Jewish to be connected to God. You do not have to be Jewish to be considered a good person by God or even by the Torah. So that's very interesting because I think that sometimes as Jews, we're a little bit possessive of our Torah, but yet it is the creation of the world, and the world was made for everybody, and the Torah was also made for everybody. Some people can become converts if they're not naturally Jewish, and other people can stay non-Jewish if they so choose. But even at that, the Torah guides them in how to be. So that's very interesting. I thought that was noteworthy because it gives us, I think, a different perspective perhaps on God himself. He's not only our God, he's everybody's God. Not everybody necessarily recognizes him in that way today yet, but it's our job as Jews to make sure that that happens, whether or not people convert to Judaism or not. So that's number 2, from the Torah's perspective, being Jewish versus non-Jewish. When you're not Jewish, you have 7 commandments that allow you to be a good person, and that is the path you're supposed to follow. When you're Jewish, you have, it's more sort of complete, and there is more of a nurturing in the relationship between God and man. It is very much reciprocal, and there is much more of a dialogue. And so we end up having in our DNA an inherent connection to God, and we have a very specific purpose here on earth. We are supposed to distinguish ourselves from the non-Jews. We're supposed to dress differently, eat differently. Our hair for men is different. Our holidays are different. But yet it's not an insular religion like some other religions. We are supposed to go out into the world and be a light unto nations. That is a huge responsibility because we're not supposed to assimilate, but we're supposed to sufficiently integrate so that we can make a difference in the world and do our tikkun olam. So that's a balancing act that makes us better people, but that also gives us an inherent purpose. Every Jew's life is purposeful, intentional, and inherently we kind of understand what our path is. When we are not Jewish, we don't have that added component. So we kind of have to, as a non-Jew, you'd have to find it yourself. So that's the Torah's perspective. So God, as I said, creates the world for all of humanity. So how do we become Jewish? Where does that happen? Why does that happen? And how does that happen? So again, we're saying that it's almost Shavuot, and that's where it happens. So the Jews, this is the story, right? The Jews leave Egypt, and then they wander in the desert for a little while. And then they get to the place, to Mount Sinai, where they're going to get the 10 commandments and receive the Torah. So one of the questions that we can ask is, well, they have this huge miracle. They leave Egypt. Why don't they just get the Torah right away? And from the time actually of Pesach, which is the redemption of the Jews from Egypt, and until Shavuot, there are 49 days. And in the Torah, we're supposed to count each day. Day 1, day 2, day 3, up to day 49, and the 50th day is Shavuot. And the question is, well, why do we have to count it? And why was there such a gap between, it was more than 50 days, but why was there such a gap between the Jews leaving Egypt and the Jews getting the Torah? So there are a number of answers. One of them is we have to keep in mind that at the time, the Hebrews, the Jewish people, their mindset was that of slaves. And Judaism is not about being being slaves. Judaism is about having the freedom of choice. Sorry, it's my son calling me from, he's out of town, but Judaism is about having the freedom to choose. It's about the freedom to serve God, to be of service to God, to enjoy the relationship with him, and then to be a light unto the nations and to do our job here on earth. So we're representatives of God. So if that was an obligation and that was sort of thrust upon us and we had no choice, that is not the way God would want it. So we get to choose that. And the very first time that we choose that is at Mount Sinai. Being mentality of slaves, we have to shift that mindset. And the idea is that everything is a process. And when we talk about conversion, we'll see that that's also a process. And it's part of the reason, because the Jews themselves had to go through a process from being slaves to understanding what freedom is about, to then being able to choose. It's said I don't know if it's a Talmud or the Midrash, but that God actually went to every nation and offered them the Torah, explained to them what it was going to be, and said, do you want to be the chosen people? And all of the nations of the world said no. And when he asked the Jews said, yes. And the way in which they said yes is very interesting. They said, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will hear, we will learn. And it raises a lot of questions of what does that mean? And really, I was looking for an answer of like, why did they say yes? And so what it means is that they knew about some of the laws, they knew about some of the Torah, and they had heard it from Moses before they got the 10 Commandments. And so what they had learned already, they said, yes, we're going to doing. It's not just a religion of introspection. It's not just a sense of belonging. When there is a contract or it's a covenant, Hashem does for us and we do for Hashem. So it's really sort of an exchange. So it's an identity or a religion of doing. So Naseh v'nishma is we will do and then we will listen. In other words, whatever you say after that, we already understood enough. And whatever you say after that, we're in. You know, sometimes when you feel something is right for you and you feel you've hit a path where everything resonates, you don't need to know all the details. Or your friend says, hey, I've got this fantastic project. You know what? It's like this. Are you, do you want more details? You're like, you know what? I'll hear it whenever, but yes, I'm totally in. And what makes us do that? We have like a gut feeling that we kind of like hook on and everything makes sense. We have this almost intuitive knowing that lets us know that, yes, this is the right thing to do. And so I'm in. I don't even need all the details. I've got it. There's an inherent trust that just kind of like shows up and we're good to go. And that's what happened to the Jews. They went through, we go through that 49 days symbolically every year before we get the Torah again on Shavuot. But the Jews went through this process in the desert where they shed all their mindset from before and they shed all their beliefs from Egypt and all their sort of assimilation and started really having a chance to think and to introspect and ready themselves, which is what we do in the 49 days before Shavuot, ready themselves to actually receive the 10 Commandments and then to say yes to God. We want to be your chosen people. Inherently, it makes sense. So they had an intuitive knowing, they had a certain wisdom that their soul understood that this was the right thing to do and that they were ready for this. Hashem allowed them to get ready and they were ready for this. And then they said yes. Because they said yes, all of the souls from that point forward carry inherently with them Judaism. The same way, for example, as because Adam and Eve sinned, we kind of carry that inherently in our DNA. This is the reverse, but the same concept. Because the Jews said yes, it is said that all of the souls that were at Sinai are then the souls that were sort of split further, and all Jews' souls were at Sinai in one form or other. So it resonates with us. You know, when we go to like a foreign land or whatever, I was in Dubai recently, and if you see a kippah or if you see a Chabad, or it's just like, oh, there's a Jew. We always have that sense of belonging, especially if we're in a foreign land or somewhere that we don't know, where we feel instantly connected if somebody else is Jewish. And it's not about being practicing religion or less practicing religion. It's just that inherent Jewish soul that connects to another Jewish soul. It's like, oh yeah, I know you from before, from a long time ago. It's from when we all decided to do it as a group. So the beauty of Judaism, and it wasn't a single person, it was collective. So Judaism is meant to be practiced in a collective. We have minyanim, right? You have 10 men, go and pray together. Our prayers are not individual. We go to synagogue. We have Shiva. It's with a group of people. Yisker is with a group of people. We learn together. We like to learn together, at least one-on-one, if not as a group. So we do holidays together, family, friend, the more the merrier, abundance of people, abundance of connection. because that's part of religion. We decided and we became a people together, not individually, together. We each went through it on a personal level, but together the souls were one. So Jews have this inherent connection no matter what. If you're in another country and you see another Jew there, or you know that they're Jewish, it's also like, oh yeah, where are you from? And we play Jewish geography, and you don't know them at all. They're in a way, they're a total stranger, and in a way, they're not at all. You already know there are certain values in common. There's a certain history in common. There's an understanding in common. You can go into any synagogue in the world, and if you know how to pray in one, you know how to pray in another. You'll understand what's going on. That's not true of other religions, but that's very much true of who we are. So that's the intuitive knowing. We don't have to be scientific to understand. We don't have to learn about Judaism to understand that on some level, it's right. On some level, the connection to God is what we yearn for, is what our soul needed. And once we said yes at Mount Sinai, no matter how we live after that, we're inherently connected, and we're kind of connected for forever. How we play out that relationship with God, we can be mad at God, we can be upset, we can walk away, but it's the same thing as having a parent. Whoever birthed you is your parent for life, regardless if you have a good relationship, a bad relationship, up and downs, whatever it is. It's something that cannot be erased or changed. When you are Jewish, it cannot be erased or changed for the same reason, because years ago, our ancestors said yes when they were asked to quote unquote convert. The next point that I have is that even the word conversion, I know that that's the title of our talk, but even the word conversion is actually a misnomer, because it's not a conversion process. But the Torah doesn't talk about converting. The Torah talks about the stranger that comes to dwell among you. And that's what the convert means. So we need to understand how the Torah views people who are not born Jewish, but who want to become Jewish. They were a stranger. They're not a stranger to us. But where they came from, they feel like a stranger. And that brings me to the next point of the process of conversion. The same way as Jews, before they became Jews, inherently had a process in order to be able to ready themselves. If a person today wants to become Jewish, then they have a process to go through, not just from a human physical standpoint, but from a soul standpoint. If we understand what it means to be Jewish, then a person who isn't Jewish, who wants to be, it presupposes a number of things. One, that where they are, they don't feel like they belong. And that's very hard to do. Some of you said, the first thing you said about Judaism, other than spirituality, sense of belonging, family, connection, community, which means we already see it that way. So imagine if we didn't have any of that, if we felt alone in the world, disconnected, and every connection we had to work for. We didn't have an inherent community where we just have to find a synagogue or a sisterhood or a school or a community center. It's an automatic for us Jews anywhere in the world, or a Chabad house or a rabbi. That's an automatic community. But other religions and other cultures do not have that at all. They have to go and work hard to create their own. So a non-Jew that wants to become Jewish, it means that they are a stranger from where they come from. And we were also strangers in a land, and then we became Jewish. So we understand that inherently. And therefore, the Torah says you have to treat that person with kindness, with understanding, with love, and bring them amongst you. Because we were strangers in a land, we chose God. And if that person chooses God, then they have our entire respect and our support. A person who converts is a person who, there is a belief from the Kabbalah and from Gemara that every non-Jew who is attracted to Judaism is because on some level they were Jewish at some point. Their soul was Jewish. Maybe they don't know about it, but I have friends who converted. I know a lot of people over the years, and I would ask them, so what's the calling? Not why, but what was that? And they tell me I felt an attraction I couldn't understand. For some people, it was an existential angst where they didn't feel comfortable in their own skin. Another person was like, I can't relate to any of the other religions, but this one, I feel like it's a homecoming. And that's not on a human level, because really it's not so easy to be Jewish. It's not, even the process of conversion is very arduous. It takes a number of years, and it's almost like you have to prove something. But it's not that you have to prove something to a rabbi converting you to somebody else. It's that you are entering into a contract and a covenant with God where you say, I am taking this upon me. Now, do you accept me in? And so God says yes, and the person says yes, and then they're Jews for life. And even if a convert then sort of says, oh, this is not for me, once they've already converted, they're still Jewish for life. They're a Jew for forever. Again, it's not something that you can erase. Once you belong, you belong. So some of us had the privilege, and for that, I am eternally grateful personally, that I come from a line of Jews, and we didn't get lost. And some people are souls that got lost and found their way back. And for that, I have the deepest of respects, because that is probably the most difficult thing to go through. That feeling of there's a hollowness inside that you have to go fill, and you finally discover what it is. And then you go through the arduous process, and then you become part of the Jewish people, as opposed to probably most of us here on the call, that it's almost our birthright. But we have to remember that at one point in time, it wasn't our birthright. And the only reason that it is today is because our forefathers and our ancestors actually had the foresight to say yes. And they went through that process for us and made it part of our DNA. So I think we owe them a gratitude, and we also owe a deep sense of respect to the people that feel it. It's a calling, they're drawn to it, they realize that that's where their essence is going to live, and they don't want to be captive in another dimension. And they actually go through that real physical process today, as opposed to being able to benefit from their ancestors having done thousands of years ago. They have to redo it today because it got lost, and they are prepared to take it upon themselves, that extra responsibility of sort of like gluing that back together and continuing the chain that got severed for a moment. So they have a soul yearning, and they listen to it. And that's courage as well, that we may or may not have as Jews. And when we think about, oh, I'm Jewish, but it's a burden, or there's anti-Semitism and whatnot, and then we think of people who don't have to convert and choose. And we chose thousands of years ago. We need to remember that we're all strangers in a land. And the Torah says that, be kind to the stranger that comes amongst you, because you know what that feels like, because that used to be you. And sometimes it's a very nice and humbling reminder, but it also lets us know that there's something greater than us. And rather than looking at Judaism as a burden, we can look at Judaism as a possibility to expand, to get our relationship with God closer, as an inherent foundation. For me, for example, I know that if I wasn't Jewish, I would have to go find my spirituality elsewhere, but it wouldn't necessarily be a trustworthy source. It wouldn't necessarily be something that is good for me. And I would have to go and assess it with my own limited human capacity. Whereas this, I know I have an inherent knowing that it comes from God. And even if, I don't know anybody that can follow the 613 mitzvot, and I don't follow the 613, and I'm by no means perfect, but knowing that there is a higher entity than me that I can not only answer to, but is there for me, knowing that it creates a sense of community with people that I may know humanly or not, but inherently we're all connected, and we all care about the same things, and we all want the same things. And at the end of the day, our soul needs the exact same things. That means that you come here on earth and you're never alone, and you're never purposeless, and you're never without intention, and you have the best purpose on earth, which is to represent God here. And that's a huge privilege. So that's what Judaism is about. And when we think about whether or not we would convert or not convert, and what drives people to convert, and what drove our ancestors to convert, it's that intuitive knowing that God speaks truth, God is truth. We come from God. So we have an inherent need to go back to God. So when we're here in human form, there is a boundary between us and God, but Judaism is the vehicle through which that boundary becomes less painful, where there is more clarity, there's less darkness, and where we feel that we have a connection to our home in heaven, and we can bring it down to earth, and we can also help other nations as well. So before I conclude and we open it up to questions and comments, and I really would love to hear also your take on it, think about whether or not a person is practicing their religion to a certain extent or not. We are all Jewish, and what we hold on to, what you would never compromise, regardless of whether you eat kosher, not kosher, you keep Shabbat, you don't keep Shabbat. Every Jew has something that they feel that, okay, that I would never compromise. That needs to be done according to Torah. I know that often it comes when it's big things in life. big milestones, like for example, let's say the birth of a child, a brit milah, or giving them a Jewish name, or a bar mitzvah, or when somebody passes away and you want it to be done in the proper way, and the body to be taken care of in a Jewish way, or saying Yizkor and saying all the prayers and in the way that will represent that person, honor that person's soul, help it rise to other levels. There are certain things that speak to us, and it's not because they necessarily make sense logically, but it goes beyond that. So we all hold on to that, whether it's in certain milestones, whether it's certain things that we'll do, whether it's a connection to a loved one here, a connection to a loved one who's passed on, a connection to God. We all pray. If we have a huge problem, we're praying. When I went to Israel after Dubai, and I was at the Kotel, and I asked a bunch of people that I knew, and I posted it. I was like, I'm going to the Kotel. If anybody needs a prayer, let me know. And I was surprised by some of the people that actually wrote back to me, and happily so, saying, my son's going through a surgery, or this one's having that. Can you please pray for me? And I'm like, that's awesome. That's what Judaism is about. It's that when it's something big, we know inherently, even if we don't practice every day, there is this knowing that there is a God, he's benevolent. And when we really need something, we know that that channel is open no matter what. And just that knowing makes us and distinguishes us from the other nations, because we don't have to wonder. The connection is there, and it's as little or as much as we want, but that door from God's point of view is never closed. And we make of it what we want, and things that we don't understand, we delegate them back to God, and we say, listen, I can't understand this from a human perspective. That's your domain. My domain is to bring you here on earth, and whatever I understand, that's for you. But we know that we share the responsibility. We know that our soul is eternal. We know that it's not just about this life. We have all this inherent intuitive knowing that helps us and gives a meaning and a purpose to our life, that perhaps it wouldn't be so rich if we weren't Jewish, or if we weren't born Jewish, if we chose not to convert. And so I just want to close with just asking you, for example, what do you think would be different in your life if you weren't Jewish? How do you think you would understand life? And what would be your perspective? And I think that those kind of questions and that kind of food for thought might bring some reflection and make us perhaps even look at our religion that sometimes we may take for granted, or we may say, oh my God, I have to cook so much, and I have to do this, and I have to do that, and how come Pesach is so crazy? And just look at it from a different perspective, take a step back and say, hold on a second, why am I doing all this? What is this about? And what does this bring to my life? And if I stopped, and if I chose to just completely walk away, how would I feel then? And what kind of life would I have? Or if I wasn't born Jewish, what kind of life would I have had? And what would my connection be to spirituality? And would I have to go elsewhere and maybe sort of like, trial and error to find something that inherently would add meaning to my life? So that's my little blurb on it. Again, I hope it was interesting for you. I hope it sort of made you think about certain things, or maybe elicited some thoughts, comments, questions. I'm opening up the floor to all of you. And thank you for listening.
Martine, I have some questions that were given during registration. Unless someone wants to answer, like the last little question that was asked first. No, not right now. Okay, so I'm going to ask the questions that I have here that were asked.
Sure.
Okay, do you have statistics on why people choose to convert? For marriage/love, or being disappointed by the religion of their family, which actually you mentioned some people.
Yeah, so stats I don't, but I have personal stories from people that have actually, I went out to speak to people because I wanted to hear it firsthand from somebody who lived it, from a number of different people, different genders, different ages, different everything. And so other than marriage, because I think that marriage is its own category. So sometimes it can be the context within which a person finds themselves again. I have a friend who converted, and she converted for marriage, but she always had Jewish friends. She always felt connected to Judaism. And sometimes God brings you a gift. And if the person may not have thought of converting, or may have just stayed in their sort of like discomfort, it gives them an extra push or an extra context. When I feel her, or I feel her soul, it's like she totally Jewish. Like there's, it's funny to even think that she had to go through that process because her soul feels extremely Jewish. So whether that was from the case from before, whether the process helped it along, but it wouldn't make sense for her to be anything but Jewish, if that makes sense. I don't have statistics, but again, some people convert to Judaism within the context of a marriage, but I think even the fact that a person agrees to do that and then goes through the entire process, assuming, let's say, that it's a modern Orthodox process, in which case it's a longer process, there is a commitment that gets built over time. You know, it's like when you nurture something and you give of yourself, you end up loving it and you end up internalizing it. Even if you just have a plant, let's say, and you plant the seed and then you water it and you do everything you're supposed to do, over time you love it because of the reflection of the effort, of your personal effort that it represents. That's why we love things, because we see the reflection of our own efforts. We see the reflection of ourselves in it. So when you are really surrendering who you are, where you came from, what you understood life to be in order to serve God and to become Jewish, then at some point in time, I think that even if you've done it for marriage or not, if you embrace it afterwards, it becomes you and you become it. So no, I don't have statistics. I apologize. But my understanding from most of the people that I spoke with was that there was some sort of calling, either it was inherited at the beginning or they discovered it along the way.
You know what, actually, Martine, I have an example of a friend that I have who converted many years ago for marriage. Then she got divorced. But during that time, she had made so many friends in the Jewish community. She was so connected. She continued being friends with all of her Jewish friends, went on trips to Israel. And when she was looking for relationships for the future, she was looking for Jewish men. And then she remarried to another Jewish man. So, I mean, even this is something now that she did, the conversion was say 40 years ago. But for her, it became for life, and she was definitely committed. And I think a lot of the people, so I agree. And I have other examples of people who've told me that, yes, they converted for marriage, but they were very attractive when they met their future spouse. They were so attracted to the way of life and the connection and the family experience, etc. That's why they chose to do it. So I know people like that. Anyway, those are my comments. I'm going to go on. There's some other questions here. Okay. Okay. There's another question. Will you address the who is a Jew topic, especially vis-a-vis immigrants to Israel and conversion?
So I'm not a rabbi. Who is a Jew is I think a sort of a more complex question in terms of, if the question is who is a Jew according to sort of modern orthodoxy, or I'm not sure exactly what the question, sort of what the orientation of the question is. But I do feel that that's better left for rabbinical authorities to discuss if it's a very technical question. I'm not sure what the question, what the person who's asking the question is looking for in terms of an answer.
I don't know. Bonnie, did you want to elaborate?
Yes. I think it's an important question for, say, even now the Ukrainian immigrants to Israel, for instance.
Right.
So the law of return, they have to prove that they're, to the Orthodox, to the rabbinate, that they are Jewish, Orthodox Jewish, right? So
that's the laws of the state of Israel. It is not the law of return is not it's inspired by Torah, but it's not a Torah-based law. It's a state of Israel that every Jew has a right of return. Therefore, the immigration process is much quicker. It's a different one. When you're a refugee in any country, it's a different one anyways. That's more of a legal question than a purely Jewish question. One of the criteria would be to be recognized Jewish in Israel by the authority in Israel that is recognized as the authority that can make that call.
Right, because I had seen a documentary not long ago about a survivor, Holocaust survivor, who came to Israel, immigrated to Israel after the war, but couldn't prove that he was in fact Jewish, and he was kind of lived on the on the edge all the time, even though he was part of the kibbutz. He was always kind of the outsider because it was not, confirmed that he was in fact Jewish.
So sometimes it's harder to confirm. I know when there was a sort of a big onset of Russian immigration, that not all of the Russian immigrants that had come, after the fall of communism were actually Jewish, but they kind of like tagged along, and they did get that sort of quote unquote law of return. But that's really more a political and a legal decision. It's not that it's not an important question. I think it's a very important question. Judaism regards the mother as being sort of the one that sets the tone for who is Jewish or not, the criteria. So if you can prove that either there is a conversion, which somebody is always free to do, or that there is no break in the link of the chain from mother to mother, then that's how a person is deemed to be Jewish and considered to be Jewish by halachic law in Judaism. But conversion is not off the table. Israel is quite permissive in a number of different things. It's not inherently only a Jewish state, but when it comes to purely Jewish matters, then it does defer usually to orthodoxy.
I haven't.
Go ahead.
I had another question.
Sure.
About something that Barbara and I were talking about this afternoon. That Jews don't usually are not missionaries. They don't go out and proselytize, right? So when you were talking about the stranger, and that they should practice the 7 Noahide laws, or is there a concept of actually converting, like in that?
So I'm not sure I understand your question, but let me just give it a stab. So there's two things. So the Torah belongs to everybody, not just to Jews. We're not meant to be missionaries. We're meant to stay Jewish, and we are meant to actually just be light into the nations, and then the nations can, I guess, learn from our example and also gain that kind of spirituality, and we bring godliness unto the world. So we are supposed to be sort of the moral compass and the consciousness, and just be inherently who we are in a non-diluted way. Be proud of who we are, stand for who we are, and do the work of God. And then the nations will do their work. According to the Torah, what a non-Jew is supposed to do is follow the 7 laws of Noah. And then they are considered, good people or good non-Jews, or abiding by the Torah, if you like, for the non-Jew. I don't know if that answers part of your question.
Yeah, well, it answers part. So say in the book of Ruth, when she says, to her mother-in-law, like, I'll be, it's Naomi, right? Your people will be my people.
And your God is my God.
Your God is my God, and all that. So I'm not sure if that was kind of the original conversion. And
Yes.
is she still a ger who's or is she a bona fide Jew then?
Right. So a ger is a person who comes to convert, and we were all at one point coming to convert. We were all at a point strangers in a land, but once so it's a process of conversion, because until the last minute you don't have to take it on. But once a convert or a ger takes it on, they become a full-fledged Jew for everything and for eternity. And their kids are Jewish, and even if they stop practicing, they are still Jewish, and their children, if they're a woman, their children will be Jewish, and so on and so forth. So they become as if they were always Jewish. And they're considered in very high esteem and high regard because they have the courage and the strength, and they were actually able to find their way back, is how they are considered to be. They find their way back to God. They find their way back to Judaism. It doesn't mean that a non-Jew has to convert, but if a non-Jew is so inclined, if they feel a stranger amongst the people that they live, and they feel at home in Judaism, then there is a process to accept them, and for them to accept Judaism, and for Judaism, or God rather, to bring them into that covenant. And once they're there, then they are Jews for, more than life. They're Jews for eternity. Their soul becomes a Jewish soul, or rekindles its Jewishness. Often it's a soul that got lost. And so the soul goes through like a purification process and goes through that whole process. Both the human needs to be Jewish, but the soul also finds itself again. It's a process of self-discovery, the same way as we did in the desert. And we did in the desert because in the desert, there are no distractions. There's nothing. There's a lot of just open, empty space where you can find yourself. And the Jews found themselves. And that's why they were able to say yes to God, because intuitively it was the right thing to do. It was the only thing that they could do. We are not missionaries because we don't need to go out and convert the world. We just need to be who we are. If the world wants to come to us and they see the truth and value in what we do, they can come. That's how we do it. So it's not forced, it's a choice. I hope that answers at least a part
Yeah,
of it.
no, it
Okay.
does. And yeah,
Marcy,
go ahead.
Can I share Marcy has a question?
No, I would like to make a comment. I saw somebody post once that somebody that converted to Judaism, and she's an Orthodox Jewish person, that it's very important to be sensitive to converts. Like if you have somebody at your Shabbos table, she said she was always very offended if people would say to her, "Why did you convert?" Because we're supposed to accept the converts like they're a part of us and they're not different than us. So it was very interesting to me, and it really enlightened me about like conversations that you have with people, that have converted, that they don't want to be singled out for it. They want to be part of it. They are that part of people, and they just want to be that part without people questioning why they did what they did.
Yes, that's a very
Yes.
important point. And we also have to remember that though we were spared having to earn it again, because we earned it a first time thousands of years ago, they went and earned it again. So if anything, they're in a certain way, the Torah views them as being on a higher level because they earned it again. But we need to remember when we have previously not Jewish people around our Shabbat table or any other table, is that we're also converts. Everybody's a convert. Every Jew is a convert. It's just that we don't have to do it every generation, and every child that's born doesn't have to go through that arduous process, because we're lucky enough, I guess, or the chain didn't get broken. It didn't get broken in our particular lineage. And so because every person sort of kept it up, we benefit from that. And the people who did not benefit from that take it upon themselves and say, I need to do something about that so that my lineage continues from this point forward. So if anything, it's an extra sort of sense of responsibility and connection to God that makes them go through in a human way. And it's really a very difficult and arduous process. And yes, sometimes other Jews that are born Jewish are not so kind about it.
Thank you.
Very
Can I
important
share
point. Thank
something?
you.
I have a very close friend who was brought up, she grew up as a Catholic. It was a very inspiring story I found. She grew up as a very religious Catholic. She wanted to become a nun. She was felt very close to God, and and then as she got older, she came here to the University of Montreal to study international relations. And she somehow, she got found when she went to church, she was uncomfortable with the idols there. And she got involved with the Chabad in Côte St. Luc. That's where I met her.
Oh, well.
This is a Black girl from Cameroon, Central Africa, and single. And she started to learn, she felt, I was asking her what was going on. And she said she wanted to have God in her life all the time, and she couldn't do it through Catholicism. It wasn't working for her. She felt a distance. And when she started to learn about Judaism, she said, well, this is what I've been looking for. Anyway, she completely converted all the way, loves everything. She moved to Israel. She met this guy who was Gerrit Sedek, a convert from the United States, also a musician from Sfat, and they got married.
That's that's
I
beautiful.
was very inspired. I'm still in touch with her all the time. She's lovely, but she believes so much. Like she could help any Jew who's on the borderline, about believing or not believing. She could push them all the way to the Torah.
So that's amazing. But that's the beauty of a person who actually goes and converts. It reminds us not to take it for granted.
Right.
because otherwise we do sometimes take it for granted as a given. Oh, we're Jewish and we have all this connection, we have all this meaning, and we have this open door with God, and it's not a given, and it's not something to be taken for granted. It's something to take a step back and say, wow, like I actually have this just because I don't even have to work for it.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate it much more.
Yeah.
I have another question here in the chat. Isn't there a respect for Islam because of their monotheism?
So there's no disrespect. I'm not sure if the question is, there is a respect for, they are monotheistic. If you see in the religion itself, there is no issue, but it's created after our religion. So there's not much, there isn't talk about it in the Torah. The only thing that is, it's the difference between Isaac and Ishmael, where Ishmael is actually asked to leave because of the characteristics and attributes that he has. And when Abraham is not so comfortable about having him leave because he's also his son, God says, no, listen to your wife, he should leave because you're going to inherit the land and you're going to be the chosen people and whatnot. And they're not going to be. Judaism does not teach you to disrespect anybody. So that's a human thing, to respect or disrespect. And we are all creatures of God. And from that perspective, we respect each being. The Islam, if they follow those 7 rules, so according to the Torah, they're considered as righteous Gentiles or righteous non-Jews. And if they don't, then they're not considered as that. That's as far as the Torah goes, because those other religions come after the Torah. So the Torah doesn't talk about Islam, whereas Islam talks about, Moses and talks about Jesus, and Jesus talks about Moses and Judaism because they come afterwards. The Torah doesn't discuss it. But yes, we're allowed, for example, we're not supposed to go into a church, but we are allowed to go into a mosque.
Okay. I have a question, actually. I don't see another one here. What are the rules for converting children who are adopted, like babies who are adopted, because they were born not from Jewish parents, and it's really the parents who are adopting them who are deciding that they're converting?
So again, I'm not a rabbi, and it's probably better to pose this question to a rabbi, but my understanding is that I think there is a process that you can do at birth if you know that the kid is not coming from a Jewish family, because they could be. Sometimes you do know that or you don't. And sometimes you do that at birth, but before the child becomes bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, they have an option to choose. Again, like they would be like a 2-pronged process, but I'm not a rabbi, so I think it's better to ask that question. But my understanding is that it's like that. That's how it works.
So I can just share that I have a very close friend of mine who adopted a baby, and the baby was coming from non-Jewish parents, a non-Jewish mother. And basically there was a little ceremony at the mikvah, and she was Jewish. It didn't take a long time. It wasn't a very arduous process for a baby.
Right, it's not when you're a baby. And I do believe, though, that when they become 12 or 13, depending on the gender, that they're asked, I think, or in some circles, they're asked if, okay, so do you take that on? It's still not an arduous process because it's from birth, but it's just almost like it's confirmed.
Yeah, because I do have an example of someone, and the rabbi, I guess it was maybe the community they were living in, made it a bit more arduous for the parents, for an Orthodox conversion. Like the parents themselves kind of had to prove that they were observant Orthodox Jews themselves for the baby to be accepted as an Orthodox conversion. So I don't believe, that's it. Like Esther, I don't believe it's like that everywhere. So I guess
it depends on the community. It could depend on the community and the rabbi as well, and the community for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sheila has a question.
No, it's not a question, it's a comment. I can tell you from personal experience that our son was converted religiously in the presence of 3 religious leaders, Rabbi Cantor, another rabbi, at the mikveh. prayers were done. There was an actual conversion ceremony, very moving. We were present. And at that time, 50 years ago, it was done by Rabbi Shoham it was done twice a year, before Rosh Hashanah and before Pesach. And it was a very meaningful ceremony. But we did have proof, supposedly, that the mother was a non-Jew.
Okay.
And he had no problems with about a bar mitzvah nor a marriage. We have all the paperwork to prove it. But it was done very, very beautifully. So anything's possible.
Yes, agreed. That's nice. Thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
I have a question. Why are there, maybe this isn't the right venue, why are there so many different levels, I will say, of conversion? Why are some accepted and not accepted? And, there's Orthodox and there's, like this gets into, I guess, a whole other topic. But
So it does. I can answer briefly, but it does get into a whole other topic. So how do I put this? So there is Orthodox conversion, and that would be recognized by everybody. And then human nature being what it is. Sometimes people sort of feel that they would like to shift something or modernize something or adapt it to today's world or whatever it is. And so there is conservatism, there is reform, reconstructionist, there's a whole, I don't know if there are others, but those are, let's say, the main ones. And then so you have, it's not so prevalent in Montreal, but it is in the States and even in Toronto, where you would have a Beit Din that is more conservative and maybe one that's reform in the States. And they would have a conversion process that would be different. Conservatives would have another conversion process that is different, the same way as they would experience Shabbat in a slightly different way, and the holidays, and certain rules and regulations or certain ways of doing things. So I think it depends on, then it becomes a question of affiliation.
Mhm.
In a way, it's too bad because it creates like divisiveness or differences or whatnot.
Exactly.
But that's not Judaism and that's not Torah, that's human nature.
Right. The divisiveness is for me
Yeah.
most upsetting.
Yeah.
When you hear stories of Jews not accepting other Jews,
Right.
and I truly believe at the base level, we're all human beings. And if we're Jewish, we're Jewish. And you can practice Judaism how you want, and I could practice it how I want. But it's almost like you're not Jewish enough for some, and you're too Jewish for others. Like, you know what I mean? That, like what you're saying, the different levels are, I guess, for me, very problematic to understand and comprehend. And then to turn around and want to say we're all part of the same
So
community.
we are
we
absolutely
should all love
part-
each other and look out for
Yeah.
each other's welfare. So, like, we know we're not seeing that in the world.
So we're unfortunately not seeing that in the world. That is something that the world is plagued in general with. I
Mhm.
mean, from a global perspective,
Absolutely.
in all cultures, religions, countries, unfortunately today. That being said, personally, when each person does whatever resonates with them or what they feel, that's one thing. And there should be no divisiveness whatsoever. But then when it becomes a movement or it becomes a group and
Mhm.
each group sort of says, I'm doing it the right way, or
Right.
then it's very hard not to have divisiveness. When you look at the Torah, there are not a million ways to do the same thing. So God didn't say, well, you could do it at this level, you could do it at that level, so it's more human interpretation that comes with the years, or that comes with the generations, or that feels we can, change this a bit or dilute this or not dilute this, and others who feel like, no, this is not for us to change. We don't have sufficient clarity. We don't have sufficient connection to God in the way that we did, or intuition or prophecy or whatnot. We don't live in a world that's conducive to that today. So we don't feel that we would make the right decision were we to reinterpret something or interpret it differently or adapt it, because today we don't live in that kind of world. We don't have those kind of highly spiritual leaders and who are inspired by God the way that we used to, the times of the the Gemara, the Talmud, and the Mishnah, and even before the time of the prophets. We just don't. We live in a much more materialistic, down-to-earth kind of world, which is the world that we created for ourselves. It's not a problem, but we need to understand just what that means. So we prefer to rely, just like we don't create new commentaries for the Torah necessarily, right? We rely on the older ones, and we rely on the way things were done from before, because as a people, we don't necessarily have the authoritative power today to do all that. We don't have the court of law that we used to, which is a Sanhedrin made up of 71 really huge rabbinical authorities and thinkers and connected to, just like we don't have big philosophers today the way that we used to, just so we don't have big anything. You don't have huge leaders. So I don't think that our generation is able to produce that. And therefore we have to be very careful in if we pick and choose and how we interpret in our own understanding, in our limited understanding today, in the world that we live in, with the little clarity that we have.
Marcy, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to comment. I think that for people that are born Jewish, so I think that Reform, I don't like labels, but it's a world of labels, but whether you're Reform, conservative, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, I think everybody deserves the same respect, and we're all Jewish, and whatever we do, that's fine. I have family members that are so different than me, and I love them, and it doesn't matter. But when it comes to conversion, I think it's a totally different thing. First of all, Reform Jews believe in patrilineal descent. So Orthodox Judaism does not accept patrilineal descent. That we believe that you're Jewish if you're born from a Jewish mother, not if your father's Jewish, but Reform. So what happens with conversion is that if Orthodoxy has what they believe that they accept, so it brings divisiveness into the world, because we can't accept conservative and Reform conversions. And that brings a lot of divisiveness and a lot of problems in marriages when people meet each other and they really think they're Jewish, but
Right. Yeah.
I don't have an answer. I'm not a rabbi. I'm just saying from what I know, and I have family experiences. So it's just a really difficult thing. So I think born Jewish, everybody's the same. Doesn't matter what you do, what you don't do, or, we all serve God in the way that we want to do it. But conversion is a totally different thing.
So if we look, and that's a very important point, and if we look at it from the perspective of we all converted thousands of years ago, so the conversion and the entering the covenant is not for us to decide how it should be done. It's done the way that it was done, and it is done in the almost, you should say, the strictest letter of the law, because then you're certain that it's done according to the will of God, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to enter into a relationship with God. It's not even about other Jews. So and if we're doing that, but we're sort of deciding what that should look like, it's like I'm rewriting the contract, but it's already there and I'm not the author of it, and God is more the author of it. I don't know that for something that's so huge that we shouldn't follow one way, because we know that that's the way that it's always been done, and therefore we can rely on it, that is the proper way that God would want, because he's not going to come down and tell us. He already did that thousands of years ago.
More questions? I have one question in the chat.
Sure.
Here. Okay. Excellent lecture. I am curious why Jews can enter a mosque but not a church. After all, Islam acknowledges Jesus.
So yes, and it's an excellent question. And so the beauty of the answer is that it's not a human answer. If we were to answer it as people, we would say, well, you acknowledge Jesus. Jesus doesn't, sort of went away from Judaism completely and created a whole new religion, and it's created a whole slew of problems for us, and it's idol worshiping. So you recognize them, we don't recognize you. But we're not the ones who decide that. It's a godly answer. And the answer is because Islam is about one God. There's no statues. There's no idol worshiping. Therefore, even though it's not a Jewish way to worship, it is the proper way to worship for a non-Jew. So it doesn't in any way go against us being able to enter a mosque. Whereas when you go into a church, there are statues, there are idols, there are representations of Jesus and Mary and all sorts of things. And that goes against, that negates the fact that there is one God, and the fact that that God is abstract and there is no physical representation, and we don't pray to statues or idols and do any idol worshiping. And that's the reason why we can enter a mosque. I'm not saying you have to, but that's the reason we can, but we cannot enter a church.
I have a further question. I'm the person who asked this.
Hi.
I'm curious also because we have Hindu temples, we have Sikh temples. There are different representations of different gods. And I'm thinking from a contemporary point of view, if we were to be tolerant and understand other cultures, other religions, shouldn't this be a little bit changed? And from a point of view of understanding our neighbors and understanding the people we live with.
So that's an excellent question. You can understand your neighbors and you can be respectful of them practicing their religion. It doesn't mean you have to join them, just like they don't have to join us. For us to have full respect in the world, I don't need to have a Sikh and a Buddhist and a Christian and a Muslim come to the synagogue, but they have to respect the fact that I want to go to my synagogue, and I respect the fact that they're going to go to their mosque or their temple. But for me to negate my religion to show them tolerance, then I am harming myself. I am jeopardizing my relationship with my religion, because my religion tells me that I cannot negate God and I don't believe in idol worshiping. That is the whole tenet of Judaism. And so by going into one or joining a service or whatnot, it's very nice on a human level, but I need to ask myself, why am I so ready in order to show tolerance to jeopardize or to compromise my own internal soul belief? Because if I'm a Jew, whether converted now or converted 3,000, whatever it is, thousands of years ago, I'm still a Jew. And what I represent is the fact that there is one God, there are no idols, there are no statues, and I have a whole way to worship. I need to be creative perhaps and find other ways of bringing tolerance, and not just tolerance, but acceptance and embracement of other people without having to negate my own, because I believe that they wouldn't do that in return either, nor should they.
There's Claude Joaquin. They have their hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Oh, the question I had is, I was once invited to a wedding at Temple Emmanuel. And when I asked my rabbi, who's Orthodox, he said, you can't go there. I can't go to the Temple Emmanuel being modern Orthodox myself. Is it the same as going into a church?
So it's not the same as going to a church in the sense that there is no idol worshiping. I don't know why. I wouldn't second guess your rabbi. I would never do that. I don't know what he was sort of what his mindset was or what he was basing himself on to say that. Perhaps, I don't know if it was between two Jews or a Jew and a non-Jew.
Or it was between a Jew and a non-Jew.
Okay, maybe that's why. So so as not to recognize that as a Jewish wedding, perhaps
the girl wasn't
felt,
Jew.
Right, a Jew and a non-Jew, right? Is what you said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've seen that before where rabbinical authorities will say that is unwise because it's like supporting the wedding of a Jew and a non-Jew, which is, according to Judaism, not recognized by Judaism. Therefore, he probably wanted to, this is going to sound funny, but sort of like spare your soul having to go do that, because in his understanding, possibly it's not good for a Jewish soul to go against Judaism and go bear witness to that. Again, I don't want to second guess the rabbi that told you that or put ideas in terms of what we're thinking, but that is something that I've heard of before as well.
I never thought of asking him why then, but tonight talking to you, that
yeah, it's a good idea.
I'm asking myself,
absolutely a great
what was
idea.
the reason?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Okay.
There's another question on the same topic.
Thank you, Martine.
Sure.
Okay. Is it forbidden to attend a non-Jewish wedding of a friend? if you can't go into a church.
Well, is it in a church?
Yes, in a church. That's the idea. Yes, it's in a church.
So following again, I think they would have to ask the rabbi that they follow, but following in the same line of reasoning, if it is in a church, it's going to be first of all, we're not supposed to go into a church, and certainly not when there's a service, and that would be a religious service in a church. So probably the answer would be no.
So then, okay, but if it was somewhere else, if it was just outside in a garden, then I don't know.
I'm not a rabbinical authority. I think it depends
that's
whether
fine.
it's but then you come into whether you want to bear witness to a non-Jewish ceremony, or is it just between two non-Jews, but there's no priest there, or, then it becomes, it's also how you feel, because inherently we're not going to feel so comfortable about it. We might put that aside and go in, or go into the temple of the Buddhist or whatever, but if we listen to our gut, we won't feel comfortable. We may feel more uncomfortable missing it or slighting our friend, but the truth is that every Jew, if we really listen to our inner voice, will not just say, yay, let me go. It'll be a moment of, and then it'll be, I want to overcome that because I have social norms, I have this, I have that. But sometimes we need to just listen to that soul, because we have to remember that some people fight very hard for years in order to become Jewish. And so are we in that moment doing what's convenient, or are we not? I'm not saying what to do. I'm saying these are just questions that deserve to be asked, and where even if they create a bit of angst, it's not a bad thing for us to figure out, where do I really stand on an issue? Am I choosing to go to this wedding, or do I feel like I have to, or I need to, or I don't like how I feel inside, but I'm still going to do it? Again, not saying what to do, but it's interesting if we allow ourselves the space to figure out who we are and what we really want to do outside of what we feel we must do or have to do, or what is the right thing to do from a social perspective, whatever it is. I think that we would benefit a lot and probably take Judaism less for granted and feel more fulfilled than whatever decision we do make, whatever that is.
Sophie Wall has her hand up.
Yes, I beg to differ. I feel I do not negate my identity or my beliefs in any way when I enter a place of worship. I just want to share a story. When the Germans entered the town where my mother was born, they destroyed, one of the first things they did is destroy the synagogue. And as they were destroying the synagogue, a priest walked by, he waved his fist and he said, "One does not destroy a house of worship." And because of this story, I view all places of worship as holy too. And I feel that if we do not enter a church, we shouldn't enter a museum where there's Greek art either, because they have statues of gods as well. So we need to rethink this in my point of view. So I respect yours, but because of these reasons, these are the reasons for mine.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
I have another question in the chat. Okay, so what would be the difference going into a friend's house that has a cross on their wall or a shrine to going into a church?
So a church is an active place of worship. It's an ongoing place of worship. Some people will not go into a friend's house if there's a cross. That's just a personal thing, or that's how they feel. And some people will. It is not an active place of worship. It is a representation. It's a religious symbol. But in a church itself, it's idol worshiping. If you go in, for example, when there is a service going on, then whether or not you actively participate, you are still present in an act of idol worshiping. That's the difficulty. That's the challenge there. But but that being said, I very much respect what you're saying, Sophia, and I understand completely where you're coming from. And it's part of the challenge that we have as Jewish people, is that if other religions have no issue saying, yes, Judaism is fine, which is, by the way, that's what it means to be led into the nations, but we feel bad as people, not as souls. Our soul has no issue with it, but our person has an issue with not being able to reciprocate. It is a very big challenge.
It's true.
Hmm.
Does anyone have more questions? Nothing. Okay. Nothing at all. Anyone, any questions, any comments? Because if not, it's like it's 9 o'clock. So I think we might close. No more questions. Last call. Okay. So okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Barbara to conclude, if that's fine with you, Martine.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, I think can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Barbara Wenger, and I have the pleasure of thanking Martine on behalf of Adath Israel Sisterhood. Tonight's topic, would you convert if you were not born Jewish, is certainly thought-provoking, and the answers are very complex. Thank you, Martine, for the graceful way you spoke on this sensitive topic and moderated a great discussion on a variety of questions. Martine, you have given us a lot of pertinent ideas this evening, defining Judaism as a relationship, speaking of our responsibilities towards each other, and the infusion of spirituality in our lives. This included a historical perspective, reminding us of all our commonalities because our ancestors said yes. I'm sure most of us know someone who has had to make the hard decision about converting. Many convert for marriage, but as you said, many seek religious meaning in their lives and find Judaism answers an innate spiritual calling. This is our third discussion group with Martine, and I personally have enjoyed every one of them. Martine, you always offer something enriching we can take away with us, and you put complex issues into a fresh and understandable perspective. I'm definitely a fan and look forward to future presentations. And on that note, Martine will be at the Adath on Shavuot, Sunday, June 5th, in person, in conversation with Rabbi Whitman. This requires registration online, and the event is free. So along with my co-chairs, Ellen Delovich and Nicola Levy, I would like to thank everyone who joined us and participated in this evening. The Women's Discussion Group is ongoing, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you.